Consumer expectations have never been higher. But with the evolving economic and competitive pressures, it's getting harder for brands to deliver the kind of consistent, compelling experiences that keep customers loyal. Can operations and facilities leaders find ways to meet these demands while growing their footprint and ultimately drive revenue? Let's find out. Welcome to Elevating Brick and Mortar, a show that discusses the crucial role that facilities, construction, and operations play in designing and delivering a compelling customer experience. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Elevating Brick and Mortar. My name is Sid Shetty, your host, and I'm here today with Anjee Solanki, Head of U.S. Retail at Colliers. Anjee, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sid. I'm excited to be here and share kind of our thoughts all around retail.
Love it. So, Anjee, for folks in our audience who might not be familiar with your company, can you share some insight into Colliers and who you are and what you do?
100%. So Colliers is a global company. We are across many countries, specializing in industrial, office, retail, healthcare, and specializing in other specializations or business lines and practice groups. So very well versed and, here to help our clients and advise on what's going on in the different markets.
I want to dig in more into Colliers, but before we do that, I'd love to hear about you and your journey. And probably let's start with, your role. As head of retail, like what does that mean, and what are you responsible for, and how did you, come into that role?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of people ask me that question, especially on the family side,
Yeah.
because they go, "What do you actually do?" But to be fair, I started in this business 34 years ago. So specifically in retail, and the reason why is because I have a passion for that creative side. With a little layer of structure. So, getting at my finance degree, I decided on what's going to still give me that true entrepreneurship. Growing up in a family where I had a very business minded mom and a very structured father who just was looking at kind of, here we are, first generation in the U.S. What are we going to do with our family and what's our lifestyle going to be? So I was very fortunate to have two very strong-willed parents that groomed me to who I am today. And I have to say, retail has just been such an exciting industry because it never changes. It's always evolving. And I think because of that, it's allowed me to tap into that creative side. So for me, I look at retail very holistically. So I'm looking at it from all the different layers of that retail asset in terms of its life cycle. So whether it's an asset, a physical asset that is evolving over time, or it's a retailer that's also evolving because consumers have changed how they're shopping. Those two live harmoniously together. And because of that, it allows us to really do a deep dive and answer a lot of questions or find solutions to different pain points.
I love that. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. Um, so you have worked with a lot of professionals in the retail space, considering you spent 34 years there, right? How has that informed your outlook on retail, especially since you also do your own independent research and you're looking at the data holistically? Yeah, I'd love to hear your take on, the industry as a whole, and then, your experience working with specific types of retailers, and how does that inform your approach to, the industry as a whole?
It's been really interesting. If we go back 15 years, there were a handful of retailers that were hyper focused on investing a significant amount of capital in data and data analytics.
Hmm.
They had one piece of information, which was the POS data, which they could see where customers were coming from, but how
Right.
to harvest that, and not have it sit in silos was really critical. We fast forward to where we are today, we have a lot of data. Now it's too much information, right? And so, how do you identify how to translate that data is really critical to where we are today. And that's both on the landlord side or the investor side, in addition to the retailer side. But there's one common theme. And that one common theme in terms of where we are in our industry, and I'll spend a little time here in a moment talking about where we are from a statistical perspective.
Sure.
But there's one common theme, and that is the consumer. And that consumer journey has really changed. If you stop and think about the consumer from the past, and when I think about the consumer from the past, I'm thinking about, they were very hyper focused on limited online research, go into store, browse, shop, consider, a second item potentially, and then, looking at commercials on TV. Now, I don't know about you, everybody streams. Cable was the past and streaming is the future.
That's
So
right.
our ad lifestyle has changed. If we look at our consumer today, they've adopted social media. So they're looking at, products on Pinterest or TikTok or other. They are looking for a seamless shopping experience so they can buy on their iPhone or any device, I should say, and then pick up in store or vice versa. They're leveraging the data to do their own personal comparison, and looking at where they can find a better deal and gamifying it for themselves. And they're also prioritizing other components like sustainability. Is that brand sustainable? Is that brand offering something that's much more sustainable? So I'm going to leave you with that because you may think, well, my goodness, Angie, you just talked all about, this online shopping. Is it going to take over brick and mortar? And as your, service channel states, elevating brick and mortar is truly where we are today. And it's never been, I guess, it hasn't disappeared. Let's just say,
Right.
say that, right? As you know, brick and mortar is definitely here to stay. It represents, 85%, 80 to 85% of our sales globally and predominantly here in the US. It's a very high number. People like to go into stores. It's a social event. It's an
Hmm.
educational event. It's an experience. So I don't see that going away by any means.
Yeah, that's fascinating, right? Because you hear these, alarming headlines over the years, and I don't understand it because folks will look at a few store closures. Now, mind you, there are bankruptcies and there's some retailers that don't make it. But even if a retailer were to optimize their location kind of count and their presence, it's looked at in a negative light. But in fact, like that's what a retailer should do. Like they should be optimizing how they have their locations spread out and make decisions on which ones they want to keep and which ones they want to make changes to. So when you look at this notion of the physical brick and mortar space and the impact that it has had from e-commerce, there's clearly you know a convergence here, right? There has to be, and I think what it has allowed retailers to do is understand how their consumer is interacting with online shopping experiences to inform how they maybe purchase goods within the physical space. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how are those two intertwined, and how is it impacting the consumer and the retailer?
From the retailer's perspective, online and offline are definitely now one. So there's no more blurring of the lines. There's no
Hmm.
more, we must be integrated. I think that's occurred now for the majority of retailers that understand those two spaces quite well. So, for example, those that were predominantly online have shifted to identifying more stores for the reasons you just described. Because when you can get a consumer inside your space, you can do a couple of things. A, you have their locked attention and you have the ability to share new products, new things that are going to be released here shortly. You can also share how they can become a loyal consumer by giving them rewards, etc. So there's that aspect. Retailers that have a strong offline presence or brick and mortar presence and have developed a strong online have seen the synergy there as well. They've been able to say, okay, we have a product that we know typically we need to educate because this product A is, I wouldn't is a mid-tier price point. So it's not an everyday you're going to go and spend, $5 to $10. It's a couple $100. But you have the ability to buy the accessories to that product online because it's convenient. So having the balance of the two, in my opinion, from what we've seen and talked to different retailers, is so critical. And you just can't have one or the other. They definitely need to be, a seamless connection between the two. And they've seen it. I mean, retailers have shared with me the minute they've opened a brick and mortar, if they were an online store and they opened a brick and mortar in a market where they have a high online sales presence, they've actually seen sales increase when they open a brick and mortar because
Interesting.
the consumer walks in, they're like, hey, it's great you have this store. I can actually now ask you questions. Who wants to talk to a chat bot all the time? I know I don't.
Right, right. It's fascinating because from what I understand, like Colliers is ready to release the spring retail report right soon. Like, so you have a big hand to play in that. Um, can you share some sneak peek data, or can you give us a sneak peek into some of the insights that you're seeing in that? And I'd love to understand maybe the first question, right, is how is retail doing in general? Because, just in the few minutes we've had this conversation, you've shared some fascinating insights, and I'd love to kind of double click on them, through the rest of this conversation. So let's start with like, how is retail doing as a whole? And how do retailers look at their physical brick and mortar space as they continue to evolve and make changes to their strategy, considering, I believe, consumer expectations are changing too, right? So I want to talk about that too.
100%. So, our spring 2024 retail report will be launching here in a few weeks. We're very excited. So, we do put out on a pretty regular basis, on a quarterly basis, our reports. So, this report is really speaking to what you just described: is what are the strategies for retailers to navigate in 2024 as we see price increase and demand adjust. And there's a lot of demand adjustments because consumers are being mindful that we're starting to see cost increases. We already know the interest rates are slowly shifting down, but they haven't completely
That's
shifted
right.
down, right? Insurance costs are still high, both for home and auto. Auto costs are still high. So consumers are trying to navigate through this budget cycle from their own personal budget, but yet they have to be conscientious. And so there's this, price versus demand study that we did. And really what we're looking at is the economics of consumption, the conscious consumer and how they're spending, the transformation in the food service retail. As you probably heard, California now has shifted wage price. So wages have increased, which has really changed how, the food and beverage side of ownership has really shifted staffing, menu, efficiencies, digital demand, etc. And then from there, we really took a look at how are consumers, where are they spending in terms of different categories, and where have we seen foot traffic
Mhm.
based on mobile data shift by category. It's a lot of good information.
Interesting. And how does how does the retailer look at the consumer today in terms of what they're buying? Like, has there been a shift in that? Are consumers buying just the necessities, or is there more disposable income in the economy right now where retailers are buying things that are nice to have, or luxury items? What are your thoughts on that as a whole?
Yeah, definitely. So if we look at it, there's definitely a strong differentiation between must-have products as well as value oriented. And so consumers right now are hyper engaged in looking at, you know, um, really, I would say those value oriented, those long term shelf items. So things that can sit on the shelf, whether it's, food or apparel, right? So something you can have and wear that's going to be quality, long lasting, they may pay a little bit of a premium if they know they can keep that garment for an extra 2 to 3 years. So the consumers are looking at, call it shelf, quote unquote, shelf life. So that's one. The other thing that we're seeing is, we're looking at, you know, the consumer focused on those essentials. So essentials are going to be in the grocery sector, the health and beauty sector. Again, not too much in clothing. That's no longer call it a high priority. I would say furniture is also a sector that's not a high priority at the moment. So they may pick up, those little trinkets to put on the shelves to feel good, like, oh, I just bought something new and fresh for my home. And that could just be a beautiful vase, right? From, a value oriented brand that's $10. And but it makes them feel good. And we're going to see that in the beauty sector too. So even though they're going in and they're going to say, well, I'm going to buy that pink lipstick or that eyeshadow, they may not be buying that premium brand. They may be buying that next tier. So with that mindset from a consumer, a lot of our retailers are thinking about how do we create our own private label?
Mhm.
Because when we create our own private label, just like Costco has, Whole Foods, etc., they then intend their margins in that private label actually are quite higher and stronger, which again helps and supports all of the back end operational costs to maintain that store.
And how are retailers looking at expansion as a whole? And I want to talk about the physical space itself, but as you look at the space as a whole, are retailers looking to add more locations as a whole, or is it kind of stable right now? And the reason why I asked that is because, so I believe you're involved at ICSC, and I'd love to learn about the role that you play there. But we had Tom McGee, who, as you know, is the CEO of ICSC, and he mentioned a very interesting thing, which was that there's a supply and demand imbalance right now, and he talked about how there's more demand in terms of the number of physical spaces that are being that are in demand for, and how much space that actually exists to fulfill that demand. And so I'd love your thoughts on what you're seeing, and how are retailers thinking about that as they look at where they want to be, because if there's only a finite amount of space available, are retailers all competing for the same kind of space, and how does that influence their overall strategy?
I think, Tom McGee is 100% right. As you mentioned, there is a supply issue. We've had a supply issue for quite a while, even
Hmm.
though we are, the US person per square foot, the highest in terms of retail. We still have a supply issue, and there's still a continued, uh, our population continues to grow. It continues to grow organically as well as with all this new migration coming into our country. So, they just can't build fast enough, but there's also a cost to build. So the capital, it has to pencil. But going back to your question as it relates to retailers and the demand to expand, they are definitely expanding. There are definitely key categories that are expanding. Food and grocery are at the top. Roughly, when we look at, percentage of consumers spending more in certain categories over the, past 6 months, food and grocery has been at the top. Because those are essential categories. People need to eat, they need to shop, buy groceries, etc. So you're seeing a high spend there. So those are the sectors that we're seeing, and you read about it today. The Aldis, the Lidls, the
Right.
Krogers, and they have different components. Whole Foods just released that they have a new small scale urban store concept. So they have the ability to adjust quite quickly. And they seem to be nimble from a grocery perspective. QSRs, same thing. They have the ability to be somewhat flexible without destroying their sales. But because they have two opportunities. One is, they have the ability for people to come in and order, but they also have their on-demand and delivery model as well. That is a call it a an additional sales channel for them for revenue. But the challenge we have right now is, look, we work with multiple retailers across the US, in the different markets. We have over 500 retail professionals within Colliers across the US. And when I'm talking to our tenant rep brokers that are big box, restaurant specific, healthcare retail, etc., we're all sharing kind of those same pain points of how do we find that A plus plus location that actually fits within our health ratio, right? Because look, at some point, a retailer can only generate X in sales based on our traditional demographics and psychographics, and they could do all kinds of things to promote, but their sales are going to hit a cap at some point, and or dilution if there's a lot of competition. So there has to be this rent to sales health ratio that's healthy both for the landlord and for that retailer. And that has to be really discussed, because we can't keep pushing these higher rents, and then have the retailer come to us 6 years later, or 5 years later, or 4 years later, saying, "Help." Let's make this more a balanced approach, and I really strongly believe in that. So when we're looking at these retailers, and so what are their strategies for expansion? Look, we do a real deep data drive in terms of looking at all the different types of assets that are out there, from outlet to mall to lifestyle to community, etc., and power centers and mixed use. But we really look at all of these, and it really is dependent upon each brand. Every brand has a unique strategy, and there's going to be certain fundamentals that are not as unique, but most brands that, understanding the brand first, and then understanding their consumer and their online and offline, to then help them develop a brick and mortar strategy, growth strategy going forward, isn't all about growth. To your earlier point in the conversation, it's about optimization. So, right? It's so how do we become fully optimized in today's world, taking into account what I just described, but also right sizing in markets where your square footage may not need to be your traditional square footage. Maybe in certain markets, maybe it's in urban markets, you could be slightly larger or smaller, right? Or in strong suburban markets, you may want to be slightly, again, larger or smaller. So we want to look at all these demand drivers, and based on those demand drivers come certain data sets that we pull from different databases that we have relationships with, to help kind of look at that full map, to say, hey, you may want to consider closing this location. You did that deal 15 years ago or 10 years ago, and the population has shifted, or there's been new growth, and new projects that have opened up in this area. So let's kind of understand that. So it does take time. It doesn't happen overnight, but we really stop and act as advisors. So this isn't what I would say a broker-led strategy. It is a strategy developed and led by our strategy team.
Got it. From what I understand, like, you also think there's a correlation between physical presence and trust, right, for the brands and for the consumer. Can you explain that? Like, is there an option today for a brand to be only online?
Oh my goodness. I don't. If a brand wants to see, uh, continued growth and success in growth, they definitely need to have a brick and mortar component, because you're going to capture more. foot traffic and what I call eyeballs to lure into the store to help educate that consumer on the brand. You got to remember when you go online, and I don't know if you have, I get online fatigue very quickly,
Yeah.
especially, and there's a stat out there that I read almost 7 years ago that said uh, females tend to well they'll close out a website if there's just too many things flashing up at them. It's too much. It's visually too much stimulus and information. They'll just close it down. They will not even pay attention. The other thing I want to share with that is, we did a small study on abandoned shopping carts. And this isn't physical shopping carts in the parking lot. These are abandoned shopping carts online. And when we look at the I think it's close to 40, it's high 40% will abandon the online cart because when they get to that final step, they then see, well, my goodness, it's going to take 2 weeks to get this product to my house. I can't wait that long. Or, oh my goodness, I have to pay $18 in shipping costs. And if I don't like the product and I return it, I have to pay another $18. Well, what your discounts you're offering me are not even close to recovering any of those costs. So, there's a lot of hooks and a lot of things that, people may get lured into getting you up to that point. But to hear that high percentage, that's close to 50% of people saying, I'm not going to buy this item. Now, so two things you've done. You've taken them through this online journey that probably took 15 minutes out of their day. And to a person, now trying to maneuver through online, offline, and everything that goes on in their daily life, 15 minutes is like an hour today. So when you took 15 minutes away from them, and then you took them through this journey for them to then now be discouraged, A, you've lost their trust. B, it's going to be very difficult to get them to come back
Right.
to buy that product because they're immediately going to go, well, let me see if I can find it on Amazon or any other, Shopify, where I can get the same product quickly. And I know that I don't have to pay most likely a shipping fee because, or a return fee. So you're going to lose the trust and you're going to lose that loyalty.
Anjee, like if you look at the different generations right now that are actually shopping, right? Everyone from the Gen Zs to baby boomers do you have data on like which, generation prefers what kind of channel to shop and how is that influencing how, retailers and restaurants and convenience stores design their physical spaces? I mean, I presume, there's a lot of data that shows what kind of generation is looking for social interaction, whereas which one is more transactional, and that has to influence design, right?
100%. So Gen Zs are really interesting because I didn't realize this, but they're actually very social, um, social humans in terms of, what they're looking for and how they want to navigate their shopping journey. One thing we do know about Gen Zs, excuse me, is that they nearly 50% from a survey that we did with our partners, Global Data, responded that they actually prefer to shop in store versus online. And you would think, well, they should be digitally first, in terms of their generation, because they saw everything virtually, etc. But no, their preference is to go into the store, to try things on, to ask questions about, as I mentioned, the sustainability of the product. Are there different styles, etc., etc. So they like that kind of interaction, but they also like to, again, they want to see it on themselves. And then what they end up doing is a lot of times they'll put it on and they'll start to take photos and then they'll share it with their friends and get their advice on the items. So it's very fascinating. And we were really surprised that, like I said, nearly 50% of the Gen Z respondents say that they prefer that in-store experience. So I don't see that shifting anytime soon.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, as you know, like a lot of our audience is are folks that are in the physical built environment functions, right? So, facilities, design, construction, energy management, and so on. When you think about like the physical space, if today's generation wants to be in the store and they are looking for a better experience, what is that better experience? Like, what is the impact that a great looking, clean facility have on the top line and brand perception? Because one of the things that we know in our space is that we don't necessarily do a good job about articulating the impact of the physical built environment to a brand. Especially if you look at, some of the functions that come after a site is built, like facilities, usually you can be put into a box where you're just thought of when something goes wrong. And that is absolutely not the case, right? You have an impact every single day on every single person that walks into your site, because what they walk in and feel, that is the brand promise, right? Do you either add and deliver on your brand promise, or are you making a consumer walk away thinking, it wasn't worth me getting up from my couch and walking into the store because it wasn't clean, it wasn't fresh and welcoming. So, what are your thoughts on like the physical space itself? How does one in this function articulate the impact they make every day?
I think it's a very important and critical, and I'll stress that it's critical. So, as brands define who they are and where they're going, it's critical that it's aligned not only just in their messaging, their marketing, but also the experience that consumer has when they enter that store. To your point, so think about it this way: if you go to, and I'm just using these as references, you go into a Target, 9, 10 times out of 10, kind of know when you enter, you're going to see certain things where you're going to walk in, you got the cash wrap, you got the Starbucks or any other, coffee purveyor. You have the pickup or return on right when you enter, and then they have their holiday or gifting grab and goes, really inexpensive items, right? And then you move in and you enter, clothing and beauty, and then electronics is way at the back, groceries on the other side. You know their footprint. Now, for as a consumer going into Target, that benefits me because it benefits me for a couple of reasons. Target offers quite a bit. They have thousands of SKUs. I want convenience. I want to
Right.
enter a store. I know what I want when I go into Target. Sometimes I find things that I was like, oh, that's kind of cute. I'll just pick this up too. But my point is, like, they've curated that store so well that I can still be have my convenience of finding the product I'm looking for, and then also be surprised by the
Right.
product I was not looking for.
Interesting.
And I think mastering that is an art. And so that's one category of retailer. You go into a more, I would say, a retailer that is very focused on, I'll just choose like a clothing or apparel retailer that is very focused on the quality of their brand and educating that consumer. That's a different message you're portraying, right? So you want to have very clean, you want to see the merchandising as you're walking outside of the store, right? From a brand perspective. So you
Yep.
want large windows, very well lit. You want to walk in and you want to see these displays where you have, very clean lines, high ceilings, lots of light, natural and internally lit. But everything is, almost like it's color coded. So again, it's drawing your eye to all the different elements when you're walking into the store. You have the apple, right? Like think about I remember when Apple started their brick and mortar. I remember it was a story that one of our leasing brokers shared with me in Hawaii, where they said, "You're not going to believe this." They came into our market and they said, "We have to have this beautiful store, but we cannot have any columns. There cannot be zero columns within our." And that was their requirement. They said, "We'll take the space if you can make it column free and have ceiling heights with glass in the front." They did that intentionally because they took what, they're so strategically aware that they took the brand from the product to online to marketing to in store, and that flow is seamless, and it still is seamless today. Um, so you have to really think about, how is the brand positioning? What is the brand trying to do? I mean, restoration hardware does a lovely job when you look at their brand and how they position their stores. And in speaking with their head of real estate, I mean, it was amazing to hear. He said, "Angie, when you go in next time, I want you to look closely and see if you see something unique." And so, I said, "Well, show up, so I want to make sure I get it right." And so I went to the location where he close to his office, and he goes, "Do you see it?" And I said, "Oh my goodness, I didn't realize it. You have the identical, the their large, like beautiful um, couches that they have, or sofas that they have, right? They have them where they're identical, facing one another. So the person who needs a sofa that's either a left or a right, positioned, um, with the arms and everything. I apologize. I don't. Their product is too big for my house, but but if you go and go into their store next time, Sid, take a look at it. They'll have the identical. They have a mirror effect. Is
Oh,
really what I'm
interesting.
trying to.
I see
They'll
what you're saying.
mirror all of their product in their separate vignettes.
Interesting.
It's so well curated. I mean, so think about the amount of time and thought going into these stores from the brand perspective. And
Yeah.
they have hired specialists to look at it from the outside in.
You mentioned some really interesting and fascinating points, right? Because, you know, what you're sharing is consumers are interacting with brands in different ways today, right? And that could be in a store, it could be online, it could be through a channel partner. But irrespective, I think customers want familiarity. Like they want to know what to expect when they walk into your space, whether that's a digital space or whether that's in a physical space. And so the brands that you mentioned, like when you walk in, you want to know what to expect. And then you hold the brands to a certain standard. And then you want to be surprised, but you also want enough familiarity where you know that when you walk in, where to go. And I think that creates some sort of loyalty, right? Like, what are your thoughts on that? And I'd love to hear your thoughts on also, have expectations gone up, especially over the past few years since COVID?
100% expectations have gone up a tremendous amount. And so, you know, I think when you look at expectations, you're starting to see, some interesting edits, let's just call it, with a lot of the retailers. And so, for example, um, you know, I'm gonna I'm gonna go back a little bit to Restoration Hardware for a moment because when I've been to a lot of their locations across the U.S. and then when they opened their location, because I'm San Francisco based, and when they opened their location uh, here in what we call our dog patch area, it's a beautiful, beautiful store, and they have a rooftop area. But of course, a lot of the restoration hardwares also have this hospitality component, as I call it. So they have a restaurant, a full restaurant, and it's well curated. It's actually curated by market. So each market is the menu will be slightly different, which I think is fabulous. So you could see that in itself is a nuance, right? So to me, they elevated the expectation because what they said is we're going to make this more San Francisco centric versus the one in Marin, which is a little more Marin centric, right? It has a different experience and a different flow. So, think about this. Like, I I just shared, I live in a very, when I bought my place, it was just me, so it's very small. And I live in the city, so of course it's, urban dwelling. So maybe I might not be able at this point to buy a piece of furniture for my home. However, I still want to enjoy the experience. So,
Right.
I grab a group of friends and I say, hey, let's meet at the Restoration Hardware and let's just grab a cocktail and walk around
Yeah.
and sit and enjoy all this beauty that we're surrounded with. Like, I don't need to hold that back, right? I can still enjoy that experience and share that experience with my friends. Maybe my friends have a large house and they're looking for this amazing chandelier or, beautiful, dining table to accommodate eight. So why not experience it with them in this great venue? And that's what we're seeing with certain retailers. They're creating this, they're elevating the expectation because they're bringing in a hospitality component, whether that's F&B or it's, retailers that are, they create this whole design experience where you can sit and design with experts and advisors and feel and touch and look at color and they render it so you're not there trying to doodle,
Right.
right? Because I mean I'm not an expert in drawing, but you have those are the things that we're starting to see. Cotopaxi did this up at U Village in Seattle, where you walk into the store and they have, I think it's an area where they call it a discovery or a journey area where you could talk about your journey with your Cotopaxi, that you just backpack you just bought. And I mean, sharing those stories. Who isn't excited about talking about, something that, they purchased and a journey they took with that item, right? People like to share. I mean, they're already doing it on social, so why not do it in person?
That's right. So, I mean, when you think about everything you just talked about, which is there's this high expectation of the brands that consumers love and patron, but at the same time, you also talk about this idea of conscious consumerism, right? So as you look at the future, and as you look at the data and the research that your team does, what is the balance that retailers are trying to strive for? Because they also have other challenges, right? There's the consumer facing challenges, and then there's the operational challenges, which is there's a shortage of talent and behind the scenes. There's a shortage of folks that are willing to work in retail, and so you're seeing this huge advances in technology, with robotics and AI to kind of augment some of those challenges. And so, what does the future look like here? What does the retailer that's looking at the data and is in touch with their consumer do?
Yeah, the consumer, I think we saw this, the last 4 or 5 years, we saw so much change and volatility. We saw COVID occur, and then we saw the resurgence of in-store shopping. And so we had these peaks and valleys, and splurges, right? So a revenge spend. We saw luxury, go into double digits beyond 50% in sales. I mean, it was just mind blowing. You had and then you had the interest rates go up and now slightly adjusting, but then you saw wages go up, right? So don't forget, wages have gone up across the US, and
Hmm.
we need to make sure people understand that, yeah, people are conscientious, but wages have gone up, and so people are still spending, maybe not as much as they were. Now, debt has increased, it's climbed. It hasn't, from our perspective, been an alarm as of yet. We're not alarmed, unless something major happens from a macro perspective. We're not yet alarmed. Now, I'll say right now, people have saved. They've done well in their savings. CD rates are up. close to 5% on the average for the past, call it 2 years. So when you're seeing that, you're seeing people go, okay, I'm still saving. So they feel pretty comfortable and still a bit confident. You see it, you see them in the numbers. We've seen basically a month over a month increase in consumer spend, right? So we saw a slight adjustment, 2 months, I believe, in 2023 and 1 month this year, and it was a slight decrease. So yes, from what we're hearing from consumers, they want to spend on essentials. They're going to be very conscientious on, private label purchases. And so forth. And if you stop for a moment and look at the 10-year journey in retail has probably been the one constant. So what I mean by that is retail sales year over year over the past 10 years has been roughly around 3.4, 3.5%. Right? So when that doesn't take into consideration these price hikes because of the interest rates, let's just say it's been an even, and so what I'm saying is it's been pretty sustainable. And why? Why has it been sustainable? One simple reason. Retail has probably been the most adaptive sector in our industry that can pivot, honestly pivot at its tipping point. You say flip, it flips.
Hmm.
It did it during COVID.
Right.
It did it during the digital revolution, whatever you want to call it, between online and offline,
Right.
right? So we are seeing retail shift as fast as they can. These are retailers, these are landlords, this is investors, it's everybody. Shift as quickly as they can to accommodate for these it's always changing. And I think the reason why they can is because retail always changes. It's in the past, 20 years ago, yeah, the model was the same. I mean, I remember, oh, this is our prototype. We just can't, take that 20,000 square foot box if our prototype doesn't fit. That has changed. That vocabulary has changed. We see it, I went to a project management conference several months ago, and we had a couple of grocers there, and they made us all laugh because we all know that this is a constant. They said, "Okay, here we are. We're on the construction team, and our real estate managers will come in and they'll say, 'Hey, we have these 5 locations, of which 3 fit our prototype, but these 2 do not. But you got to figure out how to fit within these 2 boxes because they are A locations and there's a lack of supply.' So, construction team, figure out how to fit our box in that, you know, um, circle. So you have to be nimble when necessary. And I think those pressures have allowed retailers and their entire team to figure out ways, as long as they're cost effective, for those premium locations where they know they're going to do well because it might be first to market, or they may have closed a couple of locations and this will be their only location.
Right.
Whatever the strategy is, they'll figure out a way to plug in.
Yeah, and what's interesting to everything you just said is that, you know, the physical spaces themselves have evolved so much because, of, technologies or marketplaces like Instacart, technologies that force you to think about, hey, how do I interact with the grab and go customer? Like, how do I interact with the curbside pickup customer? I got to now figure out in those spaces that are A spaces, the fact that the parking lot now needs a dedicated site where, we can have the curbside pickup, folks that'll park their car and wait. I got to still interact with those customers and do it in a way that is in line with what they expect, because they did this, they do the same thing in 3 other places, and they want familiarity and they have an expectation of what the experience should be like. And so, to your point, retail is here to stay. The physical brick and mortar space is here to stay. Is it going to adapt? Absolutely. And that's the biggest strength, right? Which is, you know, the space is very in tune with what the consumer is looking for and where the consumer is, and has shown tremendous resiliency in being able to adapt and meet the consumer where they are, right? Would you agree?
100%. I mean, if you think about with interest rates going up, everyone was nervous, right? But yet we still saw, like I said, month over month spend. And it didn't go down. It actually either stayed slightly above by a percent or two. So it's telling me that the consumer's conscious. They're not going crazy in their spend, and I'm talking about our general economy, not the, call it the upper, small percentage of consumers who can spend however and whenever they like. Um, but this isn't new. It might be new for the younger generation, but they have their parents who can explain to them about, interest. Think about, I grew up where the interest rate was at 22%. I remember, well, when my parents bought their first house, and I was like, "This is crazy. You're paying what
Right.
for on your mortgage?" And interest rates were in those crazy digits, 18, 22%. And here we are complaining about, where, I mean, I shouldn't say complaining, but we've seen, these markets going up and down, and it's not going to go away. Markets are always going to have their peaks and valleys, and so I think it's just how do you listen, learn, and then create your call it your strategy around that moment without discarding your long term strategy. So
Yeah.
you have your short term, because it is short term, but what's your long term, and stay dedicated to that long term strategy with allowing you to take slight detours here and there when necessary.
For folks in our audience who, are in functions tied to the physical built environment, what advice would you have on what they should look out for, as you look into the future, and how should they articulate within their organization the impact they have on the brand, so that next time someone asks them to just keep reducing their budget versus investing in it, they know how to present why they need more investments and the impact they have on the consumer and the top line sales.
So we actually recently had done a study to that effect where we looked at it. I think it's a couple of things, right? So when you're looking at your brand in terms of its growth strategy, it's important to look at it, call it a 5-year program. A lot will change in 5 years, but if you can at least try to create a foundation against a 5-year program, you have the ability to look at your existing portfolio, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what stopped you from increasing those sales, what does your online performance look like, and then what has shifted in the physical space. Are you located in all the right, or I should say, best in market locations? Has new locations sprouted up? Are you in a great location, but you're not maybe in a great location within that property or project? How do you then start to look at forecasting sales based on upgrades you're doing within the stores? And so when you start to look at that, you can then start to develop, well, what is the cost of capital for a new store, a relocation, an uplift in terms of a remodel or a store closure? And if you close, and maybe a retailer or a brand has closed and they saw the impact, what does that look like from a financial component? So you put all that into a mixing bowl and you start to see, oh, this is very interesting what the data is telling us. And it can help you start to draw correlations to then map out kind of that 5-year strategy. And I think it's important for brands to do that because, you know, whether you're on the retailer side or even on the landlord side, I mean, we do this for our landlords as well, is we'll put together a roadmap or a 3-year strategy looking at what does your merchandising mix look like today? Where do you have quiet zones versus heavy foot traffic zones? What are those categories that are doing extremely well where you might have too much GLA towards that or less GLA? And how do we identify GLA to increase in that category, whether it's F&B or home or other? So it's really, you got to take that puzzle and just, it's like a Rubik's Cube that's all mixed up and you just got to put it all back together again. And by doing that, you have to have key stakeholders with you from who understand retail, the real estate, the data analytics that's out there today. To your point, project construction and project management, because there's a cost to that. The consumer and understanding that consumer and the demographics. I think also having your design and operations and marketing teams be a part of that conversation is also critical. It's not a one size fit all, and it should be done in a silo.
There you go. So, one final question. As you look at the future, um, what trend or is there anything that's out there that you're looking at that excites you? Anjee Solanki, the head of retail, but also Anjee Solanki, the consumer.
Oh, that's a great question. So I am just dying to see this two-level Taco Bell where you basically can drive through, and they have like all these drive-throughs, and the commissary sits on top.
Oh, yeah.
I think like six or seven of them. It's supposed to be like really interesting. So I want to see that. I also, as a consumer, the one thing I really would ask retailers, and it's hard, I get it. So please know I'm saying this with compassion and some empathy, and that is, educating your staff on quality service and understanding the product is so important. If I walk into a store and I'm curious about a product and I'm tempted to buy it, but I have a question and you're unable to answer it, it's disappointing because it's just telling me that you're unable to answer what this product offering is, or give me like just go above and beyond, even a little, just a
Right.
little, right? That's all I ask. I want my consumer experience in store to be one where they're not asking me the question. I've had that many a time, like, I'm not sure. Well, what do you think? And I'm thinking to myself, wait, didn't I just ask you this question? I guess we could go look at it on Google together. So yeah, that would be like, do your best. I know it's hard, but do your best to, you know, uh, educate and train the boots on the ground that are in the store. They're hardworking people. I'm sure they really want to learn as well. And so, please make that part of that consumer journey.
I love it. Well, with that, I want to say a huge thank you, Angie. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. For folks in our audience who want to, look you up and or look up Colliers, where can they find you, and how can they go about learning more about what you do?
Great question. So easy one is colliers.com, Colliers.com. And you can just plug in my name, Anjee, Angie. No need to worry about my last name. I'm the only one with that spelling. And if you Google me as well, you'll find all things retail and the passion that not only I bring, but my entire team at Colliers brings for retail.
I love it. And I'm sure when your report is out, folks can find your retail report on the Colliers website.
100%. And we'll be sharing that with you as well. So we'll share together all of these great reports and this recording on our social channels.
I look forward to seeing it. Once again, thank you so much for being here. And to all in our audience, thank you for joining us. And I'll see you on the next episode of Elevating Brick and Mortar. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Anjee Solanki, head of US retail at Colliers. It was a fascinating conversation where Anjee explains how retail is in a position to deliver on today's high consumer expectations. She believes that retail has always been resilient and has found a way to adapt to changing consumer demands and the economic environment. Now is no different. She says that the physical built environment has always been and continues to be pivotal in engaging with the consumer, but it also has a big positive impact on online sales. I personally found this fascinating. So if you're involved in a function that supports the built environment and are looking for some interesting consumer trends to drive your investment outlook, this episode is for you. With that, I'm your host Sid Shetty, and I'll see you on the next episode of Elevating Brick and Mortar.
Operations and facilities teams across industries rely on ServiceChannel to ensure that their locations provide the best possible guest experience. Keep customers coming back by lowering downtime and raising your brand standards. Visit ServiceChannel.com to learn more.